This week in the enterprise security news, we talk about how Morpheus is announcing zero trust cloud management platform. Thycotic is releasing a new version of a DevOps security vault. Qualys Remote Endpoint Protection gets malware detection. FSecure launches ID Protection. Vectra integrates network threat detection and response for Microsoft Security Services, and more. In the second segment, Scott Kufer, the co-founder and COO at Nucleus Security, will talk about vulnerability management. In our final segment, we welcome Heather Adkins. She's the Senior Director of Information Security and Privacy at Google to talk about Google's new site reliability engineering book and best practices for designing scalable and reliable systems that are fundamentally secure. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome to episode number 187 of Enterprise Security Weekly for June 10th, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Good afternoon, Paul. We're finally warming back up after some snow yesterday in Colorado.
Snow? So. Really?
Yeah.
It's like June.
9th.
Wow. That's not impressive, actually. Because summer's great. I'm wearing shorts and sandals. Well, supposedly I am. I don't know. No one can see under the table in the viewing audience. So, welcome our live stream viewers. Join us at InfoSec World June 22nd through June 24th. Now a fully virtual event. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Conference or main conference or World Pass. securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click that register button and get our discount code. Also learn how hidden vulnerabilities lead to application compromise with our next webcast with Sneak. Our second June webcast will be with Google Cloud, teaching you how to prevent account takeover attacks. These are two webcasts you are absolutely going to want to tune into. You will learn with Sneak how transient vulnerabilities can really bite you and how to gain some visibility into them. With Google, it's just an amazing story, the change that they've had in all the different security divisions now under Google Cloud Security and the transformation that their CAPTCHA technology has made over the years. Really, essentially, they have full-scale bot detection. And have an awesome platform for that. So those are definitely two things you want to check out. securityweekly.com/webcasts. You can register there. If you missed one, /on demand is how you get those. On to the news for this week. Matt, where'd you want to start?
There's a couple interesting ones in here. There's a couple on the application side that kind of pulled together a little bit, right? You've got Sonatype and their integrations into the Atlassian platform. And then you've got, who made the announcement on, it was Checkmarx making the SCA announcement for software composition analysis, which is kind of interesting, right? Sonatype's been in the software composition analysis space for a while, making some tight integrations into the ticketing systems of Atlassian and into some of the other products because, look, at the end of the day, when you find a vulnerability in one of these libraries, you need to let development know. And development's working in their tools, which happens to be something like a Jira, which we use as well. And so that makes a lot of sense. And then Checkmarx now adds a new software composition analysis component as you see some of these vendors really expanding their application security portfolios and offering more. My challenge with the Checkmarx announcement is, where's the differentiation? There are a lot of SCA tools out there, Paul.
I was just going to say that. What are the differences? I know Sneak does some of that. There's some open source ones that you'll see in our webcast that I put together. A lot of them give you a report. I'm like, okay, that's great. A lot of them different integrations. Okay, that's great. How deep do they go? How well integrated are they? Like now the devil's in the details, right? Like having this feature is now table stakes as we see more and more folks like Checkmarx add them, right? And it could be awesome, right? But it's somewhat similar to vulnerability management, but also similar to any other security technology is like how deep down the rabbit hole do they go? And when they find stuff, how well integrated are they? I mean, that's great. Like Sonatype can create a ticket based on SCA, but how deep is their database? How do I manage the tickets? How do they help me with the priority, right? I mean, there's a lot of details here. It's not just as simple as, when I check code into Git or pop something into an Amazon ECR and it gives me a report, that's great. But how do I operationalize it? And how do I operationalize it effectively so my developers aren't spending time on stuff that doesn't matter?
Right. And then you have Synopsys, who acquired Black Duck, doing some very interesting integrations directly into the IDE, both from a static analysis and a software composition analysis, which provides some interesting value as well, right? And so what I could not figure out in the Checkmarx release is, they have this new SCA, but why does it matter? Where is the value in another SCA tool when you've got well-established players in the industry like Black Duck and Sneak and others that have been great sponsors over the years with us? Where is it, right? And so that's what I couldn't extract out of that article.
And the other thing too is, and I'll talk about this in my InfoSec World talk too, is there's multiple layers. I mean, there's multiple layers in a container, right? But there's the base layer like we talked about last week. There's the applications you might install from whatever distribution you're building on. And then there's the libraries that you're including as part of your own custom code potentially. And all of those have dependencies. All of those potentially have open source software that's included that could be vulnerable. If you don't have a really well-defined and tested CI/CD pipeline, these tools can tell you about that stuff all day long. But if you can't easily push out the fixes, like you work on that project first, right? Then worry about when I build the stuff I have to fix it, right? It's all about having that iterative test environment with the feedback loop. I think a lot of this can be automated. I think a lot of it's also going to take developers. And what I liked about Synopsys was, kind of showing me the path of, if I go to the next version, I squash the vulnerability. It may have other ones, but now if I want to go 3 major revisions ahead, how much code do I have to change? And allowing you and your developers to plan all of this work and fit it into other vulnerabilities in your own code, feature requests, and all the other things that have to change in software.
Yep. And then you see the announcement from Anchor, tightly integrating that container security component into GitHub, right? So again, these tight integrations of some of these security scanning tools now in with some of the developer components like a GitHub, right? So you're seeing a lot of that integration. But again, how deep, how comprehensive are some of these solutions? But you're seeing this move of these application security vendors really starting to align their data and their products in with some of these traditional developer tools. That's going to be an important trend if we truly want to get to this concept of DevSecOps, is we have to integrate those security findings into the different development environments and tools so that they're tightly integrated. Developers will use them then. Otherwise, they probably don't use them.
Yeah, agreed. And if they're not seeing these vulnerabilities, they're not fixing them either. Or if they always get a low priority ticket, they're not getting fixed either. So it's amazing the amount of technology and process that needs to be in place to make sure that all these essentially vulnerabilities and bugs get squashed at some point.
Yep.
Don't get lost in the shuffle.
There's app. You want to go to user next since we're in my triad?
Yeah, let's go user.
So Thycotic releases a new version of DevOps Secrets Vault. Now,
this is an acquisition, right? Didn't they just make an... Sorry.
Yeah, they just made an acquisition. Yeah, I think so. And I think this is some of the integration of that. But what I find interesting about this one is this crosses a really interesting set of capabilities I've seen in a couple different vendors. Obviously, you've got CyberArk and Conjure in that acquisition.
It is really Conjure, like a spell, like
yes.
Conjure. Yeah, because I made that mistake early on too. I was calling it saying it incorrectly.
Yeah. So you've got that, but then you tie that with this like time-based access where you're providing these credentials dynamically, but they expire. So somebody like a Remediant or something like that in the traditional identity space, you're seeing the crossover here in this announcement, which I think is interesting because, as you know, working with our application in a very distributed environment, how do you manage all these different secrets? And dynamic secrets with time-based expirations is a really interesting concept because it definitely shrinks the potential attack surface. I just don't know how easy it is to manage and kind of keep these up to date across the different applications. I didn't dig in that deeply, but I thought it was an interesting mix.
There's a lot of interesting things, especially with respects to API keys, right? So there is the concept of an access token and a refresh token. And so every API handles it slightly differently. And it changes over time. For example, a bug that I had to fix was the access token that came from one of our providers all of a sudden went from like one length of 64 to like 128. And my database field was only 64, right? I'm like, because, I mean, it's essentially part of authentication, right? So probably the reason they're making that change is to improve security, but it broke our application. But your access token is one thing. In some cases, that access token, sometimes it's static, sometimes it's tied to a user. If you've ever logged into and done an OAuth for a Google application, right? It may say, hey, this application wants this level of access to your email, to your YouTube account, whatever it is, and you say, yes, I granted that. Google, in this example, right, comes back with an access token and a refresh token. So what'll happen is there's you set this in the developer console, like how long that access token is good for and how many times or how long that refresh token is good for. So if I use my access token and I go, hey, I want to go post this YouTube video, YouTube may come back and say, no, that one's expired. I go then with my refresh token and I say, hey, go give me a new access token. It returns back a new access token and a new refresh token that are valid for a certain period of time. Now, eventually I'm going to get to a point where the user may have to get involved or I have to do something else to go refresh, right? But those are, and so how do you manage that in a vault, I guess is my question, right? Because all this stuff works differently.
Right, exactly. Yep. That's what I don't understand in that announcement, by the way. So.
Yeah, and I don't understand how to do it with a vault yet, right? Because there are some tokens that are static, but I don't want them to be I want to rotate. So is that like a manual? I don't know. Like programmatically could be dangerous, right? But I want to rotate a new secret in the vault, right? I guess you would do that as an administrative function. Or you could automate it, conceivably.
So let's go to the other side of identity in the FSecure announcement from a ID protection. ID protection. So what's the difference between this and LifeLock, right? This is where, you've got this FSecure. FSecure is an interesting company. I was out on the website searching around today. They've got for home, for business, for partners.
Right.
So they're playing to various audiences. This ID protection. Yeah, and this ID protection falls under the for home. It's a consumer product. And pricing was, I tried it for free, but I think it was like $26 a month or something like that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I have LifeLock. Right. I'm paying like maybe $10, $12 a month for LifeLock. And I think I'm getting all these capabilities. So again, where's the differentiation here over something like a LifeLock that has a lot of people sign up using it to protect their identity from fraud and stuff online? where is the differentiation here? Because I would be paying like double or over double for this protection versus LifeLock. So I couldn't quite figure it out.
Yeah, I know. And there's some that question the value of LifeLock and these kind of services, whether they work or not. My only question would be, is there negative consequences to using them? Like, does it put me more at risk using this service? If not, and it provides some level of protection, and it's not that expensive, then great. I mean, how we could transfer that to an enterprise security program, right? It's all, if your cost is low and there's no real negative consequence to using it, doesn't impact my security posture in a negative way, and it protects against some threats at a low cost, and the maintenance is pretty low. With LifeLock, I don't think you really have to do much, right? Like, you kind of just sign up and it tells you stuff, right? Those are the kinds of things that enterprises to me, things like attack surface management, and I don't know the price, but if it's priced correctly, that's a great service to have. It's kind of the same kind of thing. Really, attack surface management is very similar to a LifeLock for your personal, right? It's telling you about stuff that's happening online that may affect your business, versus personal. And if the cost is makes sense, then do it. It's interesting when we talk about budgeting too. Listening to the Fifth Domain by Richard Clark, and there's other authors in there too that I don't remember. But I remember Richard because we interviewed him, and they talk about the total number of dollars that J.P. Morgan is responsible for, and their security budget is hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's 5% of their revenue. It turns out that's if you look at that scale, not bad. If you look at their total budget compared to other companies' total budget, there's sharp contrast, big differences there. But 5% is about what most organizations spend, which is kind of interesting. How you manage that budget to give you maybe some of those low cost and take care of low hanging fruit kind of thing with little maintenance.
All right, where do we go next? Let's see.
Oh,
this Cofense.
Okay.
Yeah, Cofense was here, right? I mean, we're talking kind of identity a little bit, email. I'm confused on this one. Cofense launches free resource center and searchable database highlighting the latest phishing attacks that bypass email security technologies. Okay, great. Can somebody actually build a product that actually protects against these attacks then? But what do I need the database for?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is open, if it's just documentation, if it's an API, if it's it kind of falls into like a free threat feed, right? And I don't know if you can search it programmatically or not. It doesn't look like it.
Well, it says you can search. I think it's 90 days of free intelligence access. So I think what it's trying to do is integrate in with some of the other
trying to get you to buy their intel service. Yeah, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, somebody should just take all the data and actually build a solution that blocks those, and we're good.
What I would, John Strand was alluding to this last week too, is if you look at kind of all the free resources, and if you have a mechanism, and it'd be hard to make one that works for everyone perfectly, right? But there's a lot of course, free like threat feeds and sources of data that you could pull in. Versus a lot of the commercial things, like what could you do with the free ones effectively, right? And how much maintenance would that be? It'd be interesting if someone were to create an open source. And there are things that exist out there that do aspects of that. It'd be interesting how different are they, right? Like Cofense wants you to buy, their feed, and their feed could be awesome. Don't get me wrong, but I also think that's about how much data is going into it and how unique that data is, right? That's the thing that impresses me about Google when they look at their bot detection, right? They're feeding it with intel from sites that have just enormous amounts of traffic. I forget the exact statistic, something about more than 9 billion views user logins a month or something like that, right? And they have more than 5 properties with more than 1 billion average logins or something per month, right? So you feed that into an ML engine, you're going to get some pretty good results because it's all about what goes into it, right? And so like what goes into these threat feeds, where are they getting that data from? Are they getting it from other feeds? Like you can just go down a rabbit hole with all these threat feeds.
Yeah. It's interesting, some of the stats they put in here. of what they found with some of the other email gateway products and what kind of got bypassed. So, I mean, some interesting data, but again, how do I solve this problem? Data for the look, I can search for this information and see what it is, but how do I effectively mitigate and protect my environments against these attacks, right? So maybe the threat intelligence data needs to be fed to these, email gateways so they can protect better. Maybe, I don't know. I just want a solution that truly solves the phishing email attack problem, but I still don't see it there.
I think there's a potential for a great research project, and I'm not saying it would be the first one, right? But because I talk to people all the time that are doing threat intel, and it's always a combination of different feeds, some free, some paid, and they know based on experience for their organization which ones work for them. And sometimes they may have a couple in a certain area, and they kind of pivot off of each other, right? And I'd imagine as you go from industry to industry that those slightly vary, and those having great success you buy this feed, right? And then you take this free feed and you use the free feed as your first indicator. And when you get something from that one, then you go cross-reference with that one. Then you take that data and here's how you make it operational on the inside. And that last piece is the most important thing, why we pick on threat intelligence often, right? Is making it relevant to what's going on in your network, right? And those are different things. That could be physical security, that could be email, which is a different team from, your cloud or whatever. So
yes. Actionability of data. Somebody please. Yes.
I thought this Qualys one was interesting. Remote Endpoint Protection gets malware detection. Are they partnered with someone? I haven't talked to folks. I mean, Qualys is a sponsor. First and foremost, put that out there.
I don't know if this is look. I mean, they've got 500 plus engineers in India, I think, something like that. So they're cranking out capabilities like nobody, right? I mean, they just keep adding more. So I don't know if I don't think this was an acquisition. I don't think it's a partnership. I think they've just added some malware detection capabilities themselves. We should ask them because they're a sponsor on PSW. But now they've added it to their endpoint as part of their free service during this period. And people that were using the endpoint protection product, the remote, and I think they called it, remote endpoint protection. If you were using it, now you can extend for another 30 days for free with the malware capability included in it. So just interesting. I mean, the Qualys agent is pretty unique compared to some of the other agent technologies from the other VM vendors. And it provides a capability that makes it really easy to add functionality to pretty quickly because it's not a scanner like some of the other agents. It's a little more open, and therefore Qualys can slide new capabilities into that agent pretty easily, which gives them pretty interesting coverage of adding new functionality. And then you compare that to like Nucleus, where they introduce remote actions, remediation, and rollback features in their EDR product. Completely.
Oh, no, sorry, that's Nucleon. Nucleus is
Nucleon.
Nucleus vulnerability management segment coming up next. I believe that is next. Nucleon. I haven't heard of Nucleon before.
I haven't either.
It's an EDR vendor, and there's a lot of them, right?
Yes, 85 plus of them, somewhere like that.
It's it's interesting what capabilities they now would provide above and beyond what Microsoft has natively is something that I would seriously consider when evaluating EDR products, right? Like you can get pretty far with Sysmon and Microsoft Defender. And if Qualys, or if I already have Qualys on the endpoints and they have something I can add on, again, this kind of goes back to cost, right? It doesn't cost a whole lot, and the deployment's pretty easy because the software is already there. And it provides some differentiators above and beyond what Microsoft has natively. Or maybe I have businesses where the native stuff hasn't been configured because there's lack of administrators and resources there. Maybe that's a great add-on too, which is probably how I would think Qualys is certainly spinning it to some customers is, you haven't put your, full-blown EDR in every single business division, you can use this for your smaller divisions. We had the interview with Toyota Financial, right, which made me think of that kind of model. Who is a Qualys customer. Yeah.
So interesting. But then you see the Vectra AI, which is right on the point that you just made, Paul, is look, Microsoft Defender, the Azure Sentinel stuff have good capabilities. Vectra AI makes some deep integrations with that to augment where those products fall maybe a little short, but I mean, you're getting a lot more out of native Microsoft products now.
Right.
And so then somebody like a Vectra AI leverages that, adds some capabilities, and now they're using that as part of some of their SOC initiatives and some of the other things that they're doing. Again, leveraging what's already in the environment, already provided by Microsoft in either the endpoint or in Azure, now add some additional capabilities on top of that to provide more value, instead of maybe swapping out for a completely separate EDR platform.
And here's where Microsoft has the capabilities, I think, to really disrupt the endpoint security industry, but they just do a poor job of really explaining the value to the community, because even in this article, they talk about Microsoft Defender ATP and Microsoft Azure Sentinel. I don't remember exactly what those products, I mean, ATP I'm somewhat familiar with, but then it gets in this whole matrix of, am I an on-prem AD? Am I doing ADs partly in the cloud? But then am I doing Azure AD, which is a completely separate product, by the way, and completely changing in its own, product management lifecycle, in different features. And so which one do I use? How do I change my architecture if I need to, and or which now products do I add on? I think if Microsoft really kind of made some compelling stories and did a great job of, basically starting from ground zero and go, okay, what's our go-to-market strategy? What's our positioning? Message that out to the community. They would take, I think, a huge share of the market, in my opinion. And also there's the education piece too, right? They need to make it easier for people to navigate, to be able to design it and then implement it and make it easier. I think that's where the EDR companies are winning, is they're like, here's the console in the cloud, deploy this agent to all of your systems, and we're going to make it as easy to use as possible, right? And there's something to be said for that too, right? Which is why there's 85 vendors that are still, getting funding and surviving.
That's true, but Microsoft also has this really great foundational set of capabilities in the operating system and in Azure Cloud that they could make it really, really easy for all those Microsoft Windows customers without buying a third-party product, to your point, but haven't really marketed it or positioned it well. And then they could, decide with their Linux kernel integration, maybe to go after supporting other platforms. They could be in a really good position. There's just no focus there right now.
I added this WatchGuard tabletop firewall only because I think it's really interesting to think about a device that you would deploy to every remote worker to help them be secure. And
I agree.
You don't want it to necessarily be a separate device either. It could be. Or is it something I integrate on a phone? Or is it something I integrate into an OS? Like what is it that we deploy to remote workers above and beyond what they have today to make sure that there's an always-on VPN, that there's always reporting back, that there's always some level of protection? A physical device is a really kind of neat idea, right?
Yeah, my only concern here, though, Paul, is the cost. So a T20, which is part of this announcement, which is the cheapest one in this announcement, it's $500. You're going to spend $500 on every single home.
A lot of places don't spend that on a laptop. Either a full-blown Windows laptop or a Chromebook is a fraction of that cost.
Right. And so then I looked at some of their other lines. They have a T15. That's $372.99. They have a T10, which is $223, right? I still think the price point is it's not going to allow that to happen. I think it's an interesting concept. Can somebody come up with a low-cost device that provides always-on VPN and some capabilities, but it's got to be at a price point where you could literally give it to all your employees to take home for their remote work environment? I'm just not quite sure the price point's there for these products yet.
Agreed. And then, at a higher price point, so you're giving it to your sysadmins and privileged users
and maybe those in finance and executives, but that's only a piece of the puzzle, right? As we well know, attackers, you have to protect everyone. Otherwise, the attackers are just going to crawl their way in.
Yeah, and the T10 might be enough because it might be enough for the bandwidth, et cetera, but it's still at a price point I just don't see people like handing them out to all their employees yet. You get that price point down maybe around $100 or so, $99.99. Can you get there effectively and provide some interesting capabilities? Maybe that's the no-brainer solution. It's just, I think these are still a little high priced.
Agreed. Given the time, anything else?
Well, I mean, we're going to talk vulnerability management with Nucleus.
Yeah. What was
Security
EdgeScan?
next.
That was the last one I wanted to cover. I had never heard.
Yeah.
I mean, Matt and I, listeners know, right? We worked in vulnerability management for a long time. Matt, I think, longer than I did, and I was at least 7 years at Tenable. I've never heard, and we evaluated the market with a lot of scrutiny. Never heard of EdgeScan. Well,
because they were identified as the best vulnerability management in the UK as part of the SCA awards, and I'm like, wait, who are these guys? Because I mean, come on, think about it. Well, what they really are is they're an API scanning company and looking for vulnerabilities in the APIs.
Okay.
So define vulnerability management, people. Right? There are different types of vulnerability management. And when I do an analyst call, the first thing I do is I walk them through my definition. There are at least two types of vulnerability management. You could maybe say there's more. There's the traditional device network vulnerability management, where you think of the Qualises, the Tenables, the Rapid7s. They're out, either spraying packets on the network or using agent technology to look for device-based vulnerabilities, right? That is a part of vulnerability management. The other part is on the application side and application vulnerabilities. And this is where you get static analysis, dynamic analysis, SCA, maybe APIs. There's a lot over on that space. But I always segment them in my definition because for this exact reason. Here, they're identified as the best vulnerability management scanner, but they're really going after application API vulnerabilities, which is, to me, an app vuln use case.
I agree. I think it's really converged. I think even last year we talked about API security vendors and technologies as kind of a separate thing. The more I analyze modern web applications and the browser, in fact, this Thursday, Acunetics will come on and talk about some of the new APIs that will be available in the browser, which is kind of interesting. Actually, it's not kind of, it is really interesting. But it's really just part of the application, right? It could be a lot of times for internal communications. To me, that's just part of the app, right? And then external communications, I think, is where a lot of the other solutions kind of play in. But the API is just, it's native to all these applications today. It's how everything communicates. And it's an application security thing, not necessarily an API thing.
Right.
I mean, it is.
It is, but it's a huge emerging area because we know how these applications are being developed. How many APIs do we write, Paul? And we have a pretty straightforward application, right? I mean, when you're in a microservices distributed architecture, there's a lot of API calls. It is an attack surface. So look, I think this is great technology that has to be accounted for. It has to be defined a little better for people to understand. What's the value of an edge scan over a Tenable or a Qualis? Right?
And who's the user too? I mean, if it's your code, that's one thing, right? Like I ran into an IoT vendor that had a web interface that internally used an API, right? It was ISAPI. And so, I mean, the company that creates that should use these tools to make sure it's secure. But then, the company that's implementing it or the penetration tester or web app tester, do they need the same different types of tool? I mean, probably different in terms of more scanning and analysis, right? But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Actually, that's going to conclude the news for this week. We will take a short break and come back and talk vulnerability management, one of our favorite topics, with the folks from Nucleus. Stay tuned.